안녕하세요. 저는 국제코리아재단 사무국장 김미애입니다. 지금부터 23회 하와이 세계 코리아 포럼을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 현재 밖에 통역기가 준비가 되어 있거든요. 준비가 안 되신 분들은 밖에서 통역기를 가져다가 통역을 들으실 수가 있습니다. 동시 통역으로 진행을 하는데요. 지금 줌으로 원격으로 동시 통역을 진행하고 있습니다. If there is anybody who didn't take the translator receiver, you can take it from the front desk. We will operate the simultaneous translation via Zoom, so you can listen your language you select. 저희가 첫 번째 오프닝 세션은 국제코리아재단 상임의장 이창주 교수님께서 시작해 주실 겁니다. 감사합니다.
대단히 고맙습니다. 이미 저희가 주지해드린 대로 2022년 올해가 1882년 조미 수호통상 조약을 기준으로 한미 수교가 140주년이 되고 1902년 12월 제물포를 떠난 갈리코 한국 미주 이민을 기점으로 해서 120주년이 한인 미주 이민 120주년이 되는 해입니다. 이 역사적인 해에 하와이라고 하는 그 특수한 한반도 현대사의 배경과 더불어 오늘날 국제 안보 환경과 세계 질서에 새로운 전략 기지로 부상하고 있는 하와이에서 우리가 포럼을 준비하게 된 것을 상당히 의미 있는 대회라고 생각을 합니다. 이런 대회 여러분이 이렇게 함께 해주시고 이번에 여러분이 많이 오시려고 그랬는데 주최 측 입장에서는 상당히 죄송하게 생각하는 게 여러 가지 오는 과정이 복잡하고 과다한 비용의 문제로 인해서 다 모시지를 못하고 그냥 작은 규모로 이렇게 시작하게 돼서 그걸 상당히 송구스럽게 생각을 합니다. 어쨌든 오늘 내일 이어지는 이 대회에서 새로운 한반도에 대한 프레임이 안보 프레임, 평화 프레임이 제시될 수 있기를 바라고 우리 행사 이번에 키워드는 세 가지입니다. 디아스포라의 문화와 가치, 신냉전 발생과 새로운 충돌 성향, 충돌 현상, 그리고 여기에 결합되는 평화 공존 과제, 이 3대 키워드를 가지고 저희가 이틀간의 담론을 진행하게 될 것입니다. 여러분들이 좀 많이 관심을 가져주시고 특별히 이 말씀 하나 드리고 싶은 것은 우리 한국 정치 현장에서 아주 수고를 해주시는 국회의원 4분이 참석을 해주셨습니다. 대단히 고맙게 생각을 합니다. 김홍걸 의원님, 양양자 의원님, 조은희 의원님, 양기대 의원님 4분께 다시 한번 감사를 드립니다. 지금 오늘 일정이 이제 저도 이 책에는 이 포럼의 주최자 입장에서 포럼 담론이라고 해서 소위 얘기하는 신냉전 질서의 평화 지정학이라고 하는 글을 제시를 했습니다만 참고해 주시고 지금부터 이제 말씀하시는 분들에 대해서 더 열띤 질의와 토론이 있으시길 바라겠습니다. 지금 이 시간에는 순서가 우리 총장님이 자리를 해주셨는데 지금 급한 또 외교 일정이 있으셔가지고 일찍 나가신다고 해서 총장님 기념사를 먼저 듣도록 하겠습니다. 데이비드 레스 총장님, Let's go.
Aloha kakahiaka, good morning to all of you. It's my deepest pleasure to welcome you to to the University of Hawaii at Manoa for this 23rd World Korea Forum. We're honored to host you all here. We know this is one of the major international conferences concerning contemporary Korean issues. Hawaii is a special place where East meets West. We're a gateway and a crossroads between North America, Asia, and the Pacific. And this is a responsibility, and it's also an opportunity that we take seriously here at the University of Hawaii, along with our neighbors and partners next door at the East-West Center. So it is especially appropriate that this forum is being held at our beautiful University of Hawaii at Manoa Center for Korean Studies, and I'm sure you're all enjoying this fabulous facility. This was the first, and it is still the largest Korean Studies Center in North America. As such, it functions as a hub not just for Korean studies professionals across all disciplines here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, but for scholars across the U.S. So let me offer my congratulations and my mahalo, thank you to the conference organizers for creating this compelling forum here at the University of Hawaii. I'm confident that you will all have a fruitful and stimulating experience at the conference, and I hope you can also find some time to enjoy our spectacular islands and the beauty and the weather while you are here in lovely Hawaii. Aloha.
Thank you. 이어서 우리 공동 조직위원장을 맡고 계신 백태용 교수님을 소개하겠습니다. 백 교수님을 간단히 소개를 드리자면 여러분이 잘 아시겠습니다만은 어두운 시대 서울법대에서 산업행 운동을 하시면서 사형수의 굴레를 뜨시고 긴 세월을 견디신 그 어두운 시대 우리 찬란한 학생운동의 리더이십니다. 지금은 하와이 대학교의 아시아 태평양학부 코치이고 법대 교수이고 한국학연구소 소장으로서 이번 포럼에 상당히 수고를 많이 해주셔서 제 파트너이자 아주 자랑스러운 우리 이 후배 교수입니다.
안녕하세요. 백태용입니다. 이창주 박사님 굉장히 관대한 아주 지나치게 과분한 소개 말씀해 주신 것 진심으로 감사드립니다. 저는 여기 하와이 대학교 로스쿨 교수이고요. 또 여러분들 지금 앉아 계시는 이 하와이 대학교 한국학센터 한국학연구소 소장을 맡고 있습니다. 아시는 것처럼 이 한국학연구소는 북미 전체에서 가장 먼저 만들어지고 또 현재 가장 규모가 큰 현재 이 정회원과 어소시에이트 멤버를 포함해서 40여 분의 교수님들이 함께 하고 있고요. 또 분야로 말하자면 예전에 한국학이 시작되었던 역사나 정치, 언어에서 사회과학, 또 법학, 음악, 건축학 전 분야를 아우르는 굉장히 다양한 연구 활동과 교수 활동이 진행되고 있고 또 이 한국학 연구소를 매개로 해서 하와이 대학교는 물론이고 전 세계 한국학의 메카나 허브로서 기능을 하기 위해서 노력하고 있습니다. 아무래도 우리 영어 오디언스도 있기 때문에 제가 영어로 말씀을 드리려고 생각하고 있는데 제 인사말은 사실은 책자에 들어 있습니다. 그래서 혹시 필요하시면 통역기를 사용하시면 좋겠고요. 시작하기 전에 아까 우리 조직위원장이자 우리 창주 박사님께서 말씀하신 것처럼 이 네 분의 국회의원들이 여기 직접 바쁘신 일정에도 불구하고 와주신 것에 대해서 진심으로 감사드리고 그리고 저 자신 월드 코리아 포럼 다른 지역에서 열린 것에 몇 차례 참석한 적도 있고 그래서 아주 오랜 벗들 또 새로운 벗들을 이 컨퍼런스를 계기로 해서 만나게 돼서 진심으로 기쁘게 생각합니다. 그리고 우리 로컬에서도 이 박재원 민주평통협의 회장님이나 또 우리 로컬 방송국 텔레비전 방송국 KBFD 또 로컬 코리아 타임즈에서도 오셔서 취재를 하고 계시고 또 한국에서도 아까 코리아 타임즈에서 오셔서 취재하고 계셔서 여러분들의 관심과 참여에 진심으로 감사드립니다. 무엇보다도 오늘 그리고 내일까지 발표해 주시는 모든 분들의 페이퍼 자체가 굉장히 수준이 높은 것들이기 때문에 굉장히 기쁘게 생각하고 또 지금 온라인으로 또 추후에 우리가 이 비디오를 온라인 채널에 이제 올릴 것인데 그 이후에도 이 내용을 봐주실 여러분들께 또 진심으로 이제 감사드립니다. My name is Tae-Yong-baek. I'm a professor of law at the William S. Richardson School of Law and director of the Center for Korean Studies at the University of Hawaii. At the beginning of the 23rd World Korea Forum, I would like to extend a heartfelt welcome to the guests, presenters, panelists who visited the center. I'm glad that the 23rd World Korea Forum, that boasts a long history and tradition, is held here at the University of Hawaii this year as scheduled. And it is a great honor of mine to greet you as a co-chair of this forum. Today, the world is facing a period of upheaval that has never been experienced before. Following decades of the Cold War, we have witnessed the 9/11 attacks, the Iraq War, the conflict of Afghanistan, violations in Libya and Syria, the rapid rise of China, Russia's annexation of Crimea, the still ongoing Ukrainian war, and so forth. The United States is facing a fierce strategic competition and is trying to strengthen its ties with allies to respond to the new challenges from China and Russia. The international relationships in East Asia are also by no means simple. Along with the growing influence of China and Russia, North Korea's nuclear and missile development continue. In many Asian countries, nationalist tendencies are intensifying, and we see growing influence of military rule or authoritarian governments. And democracy and human rights are retreating while conflict or tensions are growing. We should accurately understand the changes. We should not stop interpreting. We should not just merely stay in interpreting the situation and responding to the situation passively. We should play an active and leading role. Rather than short-term prescriptions and responses, we must lead a movement for peace, coexistence, and prosperity of the Korean Peninsula, promote close cooperation among neighbor countries, and create a new national regional order of a mutually beneficial cooperation. At this juncture, to hold the World Korea Forum has a special meaning. It focuses the theme of peace and coexistence, exchange and cooperation, diaspora culture and economy. I believe this forum will provide an opportunity to illuminate the future of Korean Peninsula, Asia, and the world. I sincerely hope that it will be a meaningful time for all of you who are present here in this event. I would like to once again thank the Chairman Chang-Ju Lee, Director General Mi-Hye Kim, and the staff of the Center for Korean Studies who are busy working here, Courtney Oshiro-Chin, Sophia Reyes, Hannah Krenov, Sora Yoon, and Hein Lee for their hard work in preparing for this event. Thank you again for your attention.
고맙습니다. 다음에는 우리 호노룰루 홍석인 총영사님께서 환영사를 해주시겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 방금 소개받은 호놀룰루 총영사 홍석인입니다. 저도 그 환영사를 영어로 준비를 해서 영어로 읽도록 하겠습니다. President 이창주 of World Forum Committee, Professor 백태웅, Co-Chair of Forum Committee, Ambassador Joseph Zetrani, former Member of European Parliament Glenford, Member of National Assembly of Republic of Korea, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, aloha. For those of you who are visiting Hawaii for the first time, I bid every one of you a hearty welcome to these beautiful islands where the warm sunshine year-round upon the emerald ocean and green forest. There are a number of distinguished guests, panelists, and other participants to this week's forum, but I would like to give my special acknowledgement to the 4 members of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea, Representative Kim Hong-geol, Representative Jo Hun-hee, Representative Yang Gi-dae, and the Representative Yang Hyang-ja, for flying all the way across the West Pacific from Korea to attend this forum. I hope you enjoy the welcoming hospitality of the Hawaiians that characterize the spirit of aloha. As you may already know, Korea has recently undergone a transition of power, and one of the very first official acts performed by President Yoon Suk-yeol was to hold a bilateral summit with President Joe Biden just 11 days after his inauguration. The fact that the summit was held at such an early stage of his term is testament to the rising strategic importance of Korea in an era where the Indo-Pacific sits at the center stage of global affairs in geopolitical, economic, and technological domains. At the summit, the 2 presidents sent out a clear message to the world. They will strive to take an ironclad alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States to an even higher level, namely a global comprehensive strategic alliance. Under this initiative, ROK-US alliance not only addresses traditional security challenges, but also covers a wide range of economic and technological cooperation. Moreover, it also means that Korea will no longer be confined to the passive role as rules taker, rather assuming a greater set of responsibility as a rule maker in close coordination with the US. To this end, Korea recently became part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as known as IPEF, signaled its intention to coordinate closely with the Quad nations and announced its plan to formulate its own Indo-Pacific strategic framework to deepen the level of engagement with the region. This ongoing enhancement of the ROK-US alliance and the expansion of the role that Korea plays in the Indo-Pacific goes hand in hand with the President Yoon's declared objective of transforming Korea into a global pivotal state. Once one of the poorest countries in the world, Korea now stands proudly as the 10th largest economic powerhouse in the world, in addition to being one of the leading countries in technological innovation and cultural influence. It should be noted, however, that all of these impressive achievements were only made possible by Korea's strict adherence to the universal values and international norms that respect civil liberties, universal human rights, and rule of law. As a core beneficiary of the rule-based international order, Korea now intends to serve as guardian and benefactors of the same set of values that allowed Korea to prosper, promoting freedom, democracy, and peace in the Pacific and beyond. Against this backdrop, it is most opportune the World Korea Forum is hosting a gathering of subject area experts, current and former government officials, and other informed observers to exchange their views on some of the most pressing matters of our time. The constructive discussion to take part in this historically and strategically important location of Hawaii will serve to inform our intellectual discourse on the roles of Korea, the United States, and other major actors in the rapidly changing world. I thank the Korea Global Foundation for hosting and organizing this event, and I look forward to seeing you at the respective session beginning today. Mahalo.
고맙습니다. 원래 이 시간에는 그 비갈랜드 시장 미치로드가 오셔서 말씀을 하시기로 했는데 그분이 시정 일정으로 내일 오신답니다. 그래서 생략하고 이 자리에 특별히 또 모신 것은 영국 노동당 중앙위원이시고 1984년부터 2009년까지 25년 동안 EU 의회의원을 하면서 특히 북한의 문을 연 그린보드를 소개하겠습니다. 이분 덕분에 우리 포럼이 150명이 참가하는 EU 의사당에서 그 포럼을 한번 한 일이 있는데 이분 최근까지 아마 북한에 제가 알기로는 한 22번 가신 걸로 알고 있고 최근에 Talking to North Korea 그 책을 내시고 한국에도 많이 알려주신 분입니다. 이분의 그 기념사를 한번 듣겠습니다.
Thank you very much. Can I say I'm delighted and honored to be here at the 23rd World Korea Forum. I'm a comparatively new member of the club. My first forum, I think, was the 10th in Seoul, and I've been to most of the rest. The World Korean Forum is really worldwide. I've been with them to Vancouver, to Sydney, to Manila, to Almaty, New York, Stockholm, Brussels, Paris, and London. I'm now here in Honolulu. In fact, I'm just down the road from the East-West Center, where I spent a period in 2006 as a POSCO fellow. So it really is a coming back together. As Dr. Professor Rhee said, I spent 25 years as a member of the European Parliament. And during that time, I specialized in trade, economic, and political relations with East Asia, particularly with Northeast Asia. And I went for the first time to Pyongyang in 1997. And since then, I've been regularly traveling to Pyongyang, at least until 2018. You slightly underestimated the number of times I've been. It's just under 50 rather than 22 to Pyongyang. But probably most importantly, during that period, the last 10 years, I've been involved in a political dialogue I was asked to establish with the Workers' Party of Korea. So slightly unusually, because of a politician, most dialogues with North Korea, are actually conducted with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the Institute for Peace and Disarmament, or with the American Studies Institute. I think possibly uniquely, I'm involved in a dialogue with the International Department of the party. So it means that our last interlocutor was Ri So-young, who was the vice president of the executive of the Politburo, and was in fact in the room with President Trump, with President Moon, and with President Xi. Unfortunately, after Hanoi, he lost his position, as did many of the pro-engagement faction, but that's another story, and we might get into that when I speak more officially to you tomorrow. But I have to say, the World Korean Forum has helped me a lot in terms of giving me an insight into what people in South Korea are actually thinking. It's fed into the dialogue I've actually had and engaged in with North Korea, and at the same time with people in Seoul. The last comment I'd make is there is a little bit of a myth going around that the North Koreans aren't talking to anybody. That's not true. The North Koreans aren't talking to the Americans or you in South Korea, but they are trying to engage very heavily with the European Union. I've had 3 attempts at engagement over the last 2 years. The most important, there was one on, they wanted to talk about human rights about 18 months ago, and more recently in November, they approached me about restarting the political dialogue with the European Union at Director General level. So they are willing to talk, but unfortunately the European Union is not willing to talk to them. So we have this strange standoff. People in the United States and Seoul want to talk to the North Koreans and they won't. The North Koreans want to talk to the Europeans and we won't. Quite how we solve that dilemma, I don't know. But I look forward to our discussions over the next 2 days. I hope to learn as much in the next 2 days as I've learned on previous occasions when the World Korean Forum has actually been engaged. I'm delighted we're back here in person. I've done various online events, but I'm hoping in-person events will be the face of the future. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Greenford. 이 시간에는 이제 이 포럼의 기조발제 시간을 듣는 시간을 갖겠습니다. 우리 이번 키노트 스피치를 해주시는 조셉 딕트라니 교수는 여러분이 잘 아시다시피 미 국무부 대북 특사를 하셨고 미국 국무부의 대북 정책을 중요하게 관여하셨으며 그 특사하시는 동안 상당한 그 대북 문제에 대해서 새로운 프레임워크를 만드신 장본이십니다. 지금 현재는 미조리 주립대학 교수로 계시는 딕트라니 교수 겸 앰바사더를 소개해드리겠습니다.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Dr. Rhee. It's an honor being here, the 23rd session of the World Korea Forum. This is very unique, and the outreach, and I guess I want to say, Dr. Professor Rhee, what you've been doing over the years to bring the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, to bring peace and prosperity, and to ensure that the United States and other countries are all very cognizant of the issues on the Korean Peninsula. It's important. It's so important. And what the World Korea Forum does is educate all people on the importance of resolving issues on the Korean Peninsula so that eventually there is reunification, peaceful reunification. So my thanks to you, Professor Rhee, for hosting this and the 23rd session of the World Korea Forum. So this is a very unique opportunity. And indeed, having it here in Hawaii, and I know I have a short piece in the book, but having it in Hawaii on the 72nd anniversary of the Korean War, the crucible, that the Korean War that forged this close allied relationship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. I mean, that's indelible. I think that just translates to all people of how close we are. And that continues. And it certainly continued on the 21st of May, when the new president of the Republic of Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, reached out to our president, President Joe Biden, and hosted him in Seoul, and had a summit. And I use the word summit because it was so substantive, where they got together and they talked about a lot of issues, bilateral issues, economic security, how we have to come together on issues that speak about economic security writ large, how we have to cooperate on things like microchips, how we have to cooperate on all artificial intelligence, etc. But indeed, when you look at the North Korean issue, deterrence, that we are facing a North Korea now with a greater nuclear capabilities, and certainly since February of 2019, not willing to come back to negotiations. How do we, as close allies, come together to make it clear to Kim Jong-un that we want a peaceful resolution to these issues, but we have to be strong? And this is what President Yoon is saying so eloquently. And I think it's received so well, certainly in the United States and the world writ large. We want peaceful resolution of these issues, but we want to also be not intimidated. No more threats. Stop the threats. No more intimidation. Let's sit down and negotiate. And we did this. We did this with the North-South Agreement in 1992. We did this in the Agreed Framework in 1994. We did this with the six-party talks, with the joint statement in September 19, 2005. We did this with former President Donald Trump. We did this with former President Moon Jae-in. Certainly with which was the prelude to the Singapore summit with President Donald Trump. So we've done this a period of time. But we're now back in a position where North Korea is, certainly in 2022, launched over 30 missiles. These are ballistic missiles. Over 30. We're looking at the possibility, the likelihood, I believe it's a likelihood, of a seventh nuclear test. The last nuclear test in 2017 was a thermonuclear test. This is significant. On the 25th of May, 4 days after President Yoon met with President Joe Biden to talk about coming together as allies, working on economic issues, working on global trade issues, becoming certainly part of the international community as we address all issues in the region and beyond the region. And then on the 25th of May, North Korea launching 8 short-range ballistic missiles. But what a surprise it must have been in Pyongyang to see the response to that, where the Republic of Korea with the United States launched 8 surface-to-surface missiles, basically saying, stop, no more intimidation, no more threats, stop, let's sit down and let's talk. And then with the joint military exercise, this was part of the discussion between President Yoon and President Biden, deterrence. Enhance the joint military exercise, bring strategic assets to the region, make it very clear that missile defense is important for the security of the people in the Republic of Korea, and for those who are foreigners who are living in the Republic of Korea, and beyond, to our allies in Japan. These are all very important. Now, if it wasn't well received in Pyongyang, how could it not be well received? If it wasn't well received in Beijing, how could it not be well received? If it wasn't well received in Moscow, how could it not be well received? Why does a country not have the right, the obligation to defend its people? And that's missile defense, that's extended nuclear deterrence, and that's ensuring that we don't stumble into accidental war. And I make this point very, very important. Very important point. Because I think what we have to understand is and I think going back to January 2021 at the 8th Workers' Party Congress, Kim Jong-un made it very clear. There should be no surprise, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to enhance, we're going to build more nuclear weapons, we're going to build more missiles to deliver those, we're going to build hypersonic missiles, we're going to build submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and we're going to have, even rail-launched missiles. solid fuel missiles. We're going to MIRV it, multiple warhead missiles. And so very, very clear, various statements out there on that. And even more recent than that, in the last few months, when we talk about comments that were coming out of Pyongyang, and that resonated so powerfully in South Korea and in the United States and in the world, where Kim Jong-un made it very clear that if there's a perception of a threat to the security of the DPRK, we could use our nuclear weapons. If there's a perceived threat to the security of the DPRK, we may even have to preemptively use our nuclear weapons. Think of what that means. Think of what that means. When we talk about accidental war, when we go back, we were talking the 72nd anniversary of the Korean War. When we go back to the First World War, how one stumbles into something that escalates, the Second World War. These are such powerful issues. The power here is this allied relationship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. And with the Yoon administration, and I think now as observers to the NATO meeting, making it very clear that the Republic of Korea is a global actor. There are regional issues, obviously, and the Republic of Korea has been working those issues with the United States and Japan, the European Union and others, but there are global issues, and the Republic of Korea is part of that. What a powerful statement from the new administration. The Yoon administration is making it very clear, and the Biden administration is applauding that and saying, let's move forward together. The key here, ladies and gentlemen, and having been a negotiator in the six-party talks, having spent over 13 years dealing with the North Koreans, not only between 2003 and 2006 as a negotiator, working with Ambassador, Chae Soon-hee, who's now the foreign minister, but also Kim Gae-kwan, Lee Jung-ho, and many of the others, but also after 2006, having 1.5, as Glenn Ford mentioned, 1.5 meetings, having these informal dialogues with the people like Lee Jung-ho, Chae Soon-hee, Han Sung-rol, and many of the others, and spending time in Pyongyang, meeting with the leadership, Kim Yong-chol and many of the others, and understanding where they are. I'll tell you this, working with the North Korean diplomats, I found very positive. They're extremely professional, they know the issues. I think writ large, I think Kim Jong-un made a very good selection with Chae Soon-hee as the foreign minister. She knows the issues. She's been working it since 2003 in the six-party talks, right through the summits between former President Moon Jae-in and then former President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And now, as the foreign minister, she knows the issues, but she also knows negotiations, the power of negotiating, the power of communications. And we should never lose sight of that. When we're negotiating, and the record's very clear. We could just do a little research, and this is we're at the University of Hawaii, and this is what many of your students do, sir. They do some outstanding research and some great analysis and writings. But when we're negotiating, there's no proliferation. There's no more intimidation and threats. It's when we stop negotiating. It's when we stop talking that we have the escalation. So I want to cover 3 points. The first point I briefly mentioned was the U.S.-ROK relationship. Very powerful, very strong. Deterrence, but working across the border on economic security, et cetera, writ large. But also the DPRK that will continue to escalate. Will continue to escalate. There's no question about that. And the likelihood of a seventh nuclear test, assuming China doesn't dissuade Kim Jong-un from having a seventh nuclear test. It's likely we would see a seventh nuclear test, and continuations with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Just think what that means, though. Just think what that means. If you're looking at short-range ballistic missiles that can touch the Republic of Korea, that can touch Japan, intermediate range ballistic missiles that can go as far as Guam, intercontinental ballistic missiles that can touch the whole of the United States. Just think about that. Knowing, and I'm one who assessed that not only do they have a number of nuclear weapons, whether it's 40, whether it's 60, but they've miniaturized it. They can mate it to a missile delivery system. And to see something launched and you're not sure what's on the tip of it, wow. So that's powerful. But I'd also like to talk about U.S.-China relations. Because Professor Rhee, you said I could just spend 5 minutes talking a little about the region. And I think I have just 5 minutes, and let me just spend 5 minutes talking about that. U.S.-China relations. First of all, let me just say this very clearly. China, and I worked with the People's Republic of China in the six-party talks. Their current State Council of Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, was the head of the host of the six-party talk negotiations in Beijing, did a great job. He, working with Ambassador Fu Ying, did a great job. I give a lot of credit to China in the six-party process and so forth. I also put a lot of pressure on China because I think China is key to resolving issues with North Korea, certainly from the vantage point of the United States and the vantage point of the Republic of Korea. And China has a lot of leverage, and we know that. Over 90% of the trade, 90% of the crude oil, 90% of the petroleum products, it's between China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So China has a lot of leverage. There's no question on that. But let's look at U.S.-China relations, because that's important. Because if our relations are not going that well, there's a lot of tension. There may be an inclination to say, should we cooperate? Should we cooperate on North Korea? So there are issues where China and the U.S. need to come together and do come together. Certainly we've come together on North Korea, on climate change, on pandemics, et cetera, and we see this with COVID-19, the need to either further cooperation on these issues here. But there are other issues here. There's competitive issues here, an economic competitive area now. Don't steal intellectual property. Don't advantage your private sector companies, et cetera. So there are there's no problem. We should all compete in the economic playing field out there. There's no question about that. But there are areas of tension. And that touches the Republic of Korea and the United States, the Indo-China Pacific region, the South China Sea, the East China Sea. When we talk about what's going on and looking at issues with Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait issues. When we look at what's happening on other issues that touch the relationship, whether it's the national security law in Hong Kong, or whether it's the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, these are issues. And it gets back to a number of the comments that were made previously. What keeps the United States and the Republic of Korea close together in so many ways represents our shared values. That's soft power. It's not hard power. It's not how many nuclear weapons you have. It's not how many nuclear ballistic missiles you have and everything. It's our shared power, the rule of law, respect for human rights, et cetera. That resonates, and that goes a long way. So there are a number of issues with the People's Republic of China and the United States, and we are working very closely with the Republic of Korea and others. I know when President Joe Biden visited with President Yoon, they talked about a lot of issues in the region, to include Quad, which is a defensive organization that's looking at economic opportunities of coming together, and that's part of NATO. So let me just end on this note. On this note, and I think China, there is significant tension in the U.S.-China relationship, but there are so many opportunities, and I think this is for peaceful coexistence where we can work together, we can cooperate on all these, on the global issues, and I think that's important. And we're all prepared to compete because the public benefits with competition. But the issues that require attention, whether it's the South China Sea, a free and open Indo-Pacific region. I think that's where we have to come together, and that's where we have to work. These are not alliances that contain China. I can assure you, having worked in the U.S. government for over 30 years, the U.S. is not interested in containing China. That's not where we are. So let me congratulate Professor Rhee and all the great work that the forum does to elucidate on these key issues that touch the Korean Peninsula, because eventually it's the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. It's the wishes of the people in the Republic of Korea and the DPRK of coming together, whether it's the beginning of a confederation that will move to a federation and then move to reunification, whether it's reconstituting the Kaesong industrial complex and the visits of separated families and visiting at Mount Kumgang, these initiatives that are so important. So everything is on the table. But I think the key point is that with the Yoon administration and with the Biden administration, it's a view of, look, we want to negotiate. We'll negotiate any place, any time, but we don't want to do it from a position of weakness. We want to do it from a position of self-preservation. That's strength. No one's intimidating, but it's just strength. And no one wants to be intimidated. So thank you for this, Professor Rhee, and thank you for having this forum. I think it really resonates. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. 우리 조셉 딕트라리 교수는 오랜 시간을 국무부에서 경험을 하셨고 아주 유익한 말씀을 많이 해주셨습니다. 근데 사실은 지금 우리는 이 하와이에서 지금 논의하려고 하는 것 중에 하나가 소위 미국의 인도 태평양 전략이라고 하는 것을 우리가 논의를 하는데 여기에 상당히 모호성이 있다고 생각을 합니다. 이 모호성 속에 미중 관계가 있고 한미 관계가 있고 한중 관계가 있고 여기서 우리가 편향적일 것이냐 균형을 가질 것이냐 어떤 선택을 어떻게 할 것이냐 하는 것은 우리가 논의해야 될 고민이 아닌가 생각을 합니다. 어쨌든 얼마만이라도 우리가 좀 어떤 근접할 수 있는 그런 기회가 되기를 바랍니다. 여기서 한 분 특별히 제가 소개를 한번 올리고 싶습니다. 저 오스트레일리아에서 오셨는데 라크우드라고 하는 분을 소개를 하겠습니다. 이 라크우드 이분은 미국 분이신데 지금 오스트리아에서 열린 핵 네트워크 대표를 하고 계십니다. 상당히 중요한 역할을 특히 한반도의 핵 관련의 중요한 역할을 하고 계시는데 라크우드를 잠시 인사 올리겠습니다. 박수로 좀 환영. 자, 우리가 지금 예정보다 우리가 10시에 이 시간이 이제 10시까지로 돼 있는데 조금 일찍 끝나는 것 같습니다. 도중에 주지사도 안 오시고 그래서 좀 일찍 끝내겠습니다. 지금 이 시간 이제 커피 브레이크를 하고 이어서 제1세션으로 가는데 이번에 이제 또 하나 애석하게 생각하는 것은 중국과 러시아 이 고정적으로 참가하시는 분들이 이번에 참가를 못했습니다. 카자흐스탄에서 참가를 못하고 그 이유는 비자가 안 나와가지고 막판까지 노력해서 할 수 없이 그분들이 이번에 줌으로 참여를 하시는 걸로 그렇게 했습니다. 여러분들이 하여튼 한 11명이 이번에 참가를 우리 원래 예정에 11명이 속대로 빵꾸가 나가지고 하여튼 줌으로 참여하시는 걸로 그렇게 됐습니다. 그거 양해해 주시고 지금 이제 커피 브레이크로 다른 하실 말씀 시간이 있으니까 혹시 이 시간에 질의응답은 없는데 질문하실 게 있으십니까? 우리 또 기조발제에 대해서 질문하실 게 있으면 질문을 해도 좋습니다. 있으십니까? 없으면 이것으로 이 오프닝 세션을 마치고 커피 브레이크 시간을 갖고 이어서 제1세션으로 들어가겠습니다. 감사합니다. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Anyway, it's time to start the first session. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As I'm Joo-hyun Kim of Kookmin University in Korea, I'm serving as moderator for the first session. It's my great honor to be a moderator for the first session. The weather is good and sunny, bright, and outside. It's hard to stay inside, but we have to continue our first session. So, because of the lot of some visa problems, Suinong from China cannot attend here, so he might connect through the Zoom, and also our another guest speaker is Rob York, the program director of regional affairs at the Pacific Forum. He got the COVID problem, so he cannot attend here. So he might connect it through the Zoom. And then President Jung Sang-mo, he's here. He's an old friend of participant of our forum, so he can present it here. And then another problem is Satoshi Shirai is Kyoto University. He's also is not connected so far. So he's supposed to be here in Hawaii, but somehow he had some problems and we cannot show him here. So if he's connected, he might come through the Zoom. Otherwise, we'll present 3 persons, Suinong and Rob York and Jung Sang-mo. So until Suinong is attend, we'll start the presentation of Jung Sang-mo first. It's not connected yet? Not yet? Rob is here. So, okay, we'll start from the President Jung Sang-mo, and then Rob York. Then if Suinong is connected, then he will go in that sequence. Okay, let's invite President Jung Sang-mo on the podium.
방금 소개받은 평화민족문화연구원 이사장 정상모라고 합니다. 2022년 2월 24일 우크라이나 사태가 터져가지고 21세기 국제 질서 변화에 중대한 분기점이 되지 않을까 이런 얘기가 나오고 있습니다. 아직도 우크라이나 사태는 불행하게도 계속 진행되고 있습니다만 이 전쟁의 여파가 어떻게 될지 이로 인해서 미국과 중국, 러시아 패권 경쟁 갈등이 더욱 심해지고 신냉전이 격화되지 않을까 이런 우려가 나오면서 세계 평화의 불안정성이 더욱 높아지지 않을까 이런 우려가 나오고 있습니다. 오히려 이런 계기로 진정한 세계 평화의 모색이 될 수도 있지 않을까 이런 희망도 한번 해봅니다. 어떻든 우크라이나 사태를 계기로 해서 과연 우리 세계 평화는 어떻게 되고 있는지 돼 갈 것인지 그 근본적인 요인은 또 무엇인지 근본적인 질문을 해보고 싶네요. 세계 질서를 지탱하고 있는 여러 가지 제도적인 장치가 있죠. 유엔 헌장도 있고 핵무기 비핵 확산 금지 협정, 핵무기 비확산 체제 이런 제도적인 장치가 있고 이를 위해서 유엔이라든지 또 나토 이런 국제 기구가 과연 세계 평화와 안녕, 질서를 위해서 제대로 기능을 발휘하고 있는 것인지 만약에 그렇지 않다면 진정한 평화를 위해서 우리는 어떻게 해야 할지 중대한 시점이라고 생각이 됩니다. 미국과 패권 경쟁, 이미 패권 경쟁이라는 말이 나오고 있습니다만 그 배경에는 미국 민족주의와 중화민족주의 충돌이라는 그런 지적 설명이 나오고 있는데요. 미국 민족주의 아시다시피 미국은 여러 가지 다양한 인종, 민족으로 구성이 되어 있죠. 그런 미국에 대해서 미국 민족주의 이런 표현이 과연 적절한가 이런 생각이 들 수도 있는데요. 베네딕트 앤더슨이라는 사람이 상상의 공동체라는 민족 의식으로 민족주의를 접근하고 있습니다. 여러 인종, 다양한 인종으로 구성되어 있을수록 국가의 집결이 필요하겠죠. 그래서 인위적인 개념인 상상의 공동체 민족 개념으로 민족주의를 설정을 하고 이미 아시다시피 중화민족주의가 지금 전개되고 있습니다. 중화민족주의도 중국 56개 민족으로 구성되어 있죠. 미국 민족주의 뿌리는 앵글로색슨 인종적 민족 의식에 이제 뿌리를 두고 있는데 여기서 근본적인 문제는 앵글로색슨 민족 의식에서 미국 민족주의가 출발은 하지만 영국 본토의 영국인과 미국의 영국인은 다르다. 미국이야말로 진정한 모범적이고 이상적인 본토의 영지인과 다른, 더 나아가서 미국 바깥 세상과 다른 모범적이고 이상적인 민족이 바로 미국인이다. 이렇게 미국 민족주의를 규정을 하고 있습니다. 여기서 이제 근본적으로 나오는 문제는 이런 미국 바깥을 부정적으로 보고 미국이야말로 가장 이상적이고 모범적인 것으로 인식하는 미국 예외론적 선민의식, 구원자적인 소명의식에서 미국 패권주의가 나온다, 이렇게 설명을 하고 있습니다. 아까 미국 바깥은 부정적으로 본다고 그랬죠. 미국은 이상적이고 모범적인 거고, 미국 민족주의의 본질은 지금 말씀드린 대로 바깥을 부정적으로 보면서 적을 전제로 합니다. 이제 종교로는 미국 시민종교인 칼빈에서 나온 걸로 보이는데, 그래서 미국 바깥에 있는 적을 가장 모범적이고 이상적인 미국인의 가치를 전파해야 된다 하는 데서 미국 패권주의가 나오게 되고, 따라서 미국 패권주의는 적을 전제로 한다, 이렇게 말씀을 드릴 수가 있습니다. 2차 대전이 끝나고 자연스럽게 미국이 영국을 대신해서 패권 국가가 되죠. 사실 제2차 세계 대전에서 미국은 1941년 태평양 전쟁 이후 이제 참여를 했기 때문에 큰 피해를 입지 않았습니다. 본토는 공격을 당하지 않았어요. 가장 피해를 받은 나라가 소련입니다. 왜? 독일을 상대로 했기 때문에요. 그래서 제2차 전쟁 끝나고 나서 소련으로서는 미국과 경쟁할 처지가 안 됐어요. 하루빨리 전쟁에서 피해 복구해가지고 그럴 처지였거든요. 그런데 아까 말씀드렸죠. 미국 민족주의에서 패권주의가 나오고 적을 전제로 해야 되기 때문에 소련을 적으로 삼고 설정하고, 미국은 가장 자유로운 미국, 가장 모범적인 미국의 가치를 전파해야 되기 때문에 소련을 악의 대상으로 삼는 냉전이 시작되고 그게 주도가 됐죠. 불가피하게 소련으로서는 그 냉전으로 같이 갈 수밖에 없었습니다. 미국의 그 민족주의, 패권주의에서 주도가 돼가지고 그 결과는 이제 다 아시고, 문제는 지금 다시 신냉전 얘기가 나오고 있습니다. 신냉전 얘기가 부쩍 나오기 시작한 것은 2019년 7월에 폼페이오 미국 국무장관이 신냉전을 선포를 하고, 미국 공산주의야말로 쉽게 얘기해서 타도 대상이다, 이러면서 이제 부쩍 신냉전이 부각되기 시작을 했습니다. 아까 미국 민족주의를 말씀을 드렸는데 1990년대 초 잠시 좀 냉전이 1차 냉전이 끝났으니까 과대구가 있었죠. 그런데 이제 미국의 네오콘이라는 새로운 보수주의 세력이 등장을 해서 좀 더 미국 민족주의가 적극적인 개입주의 형식으로 나타나게 됩니다. 그 이전의 보수 세력은 이제 대표적인 인물이 키신저죠. 세력 균형론에 입각해서 냉전이 관리가 됐는데 이 새로운 보수주의 세력 네오콘이 등장하면서 적극적인 개입주의 대표적인 게 악은 미리 예방을 해야 된다. 선제 공격에 의한 예방 전쟁론이 나오게 됩니다. 문제는 뭐 자세한 내용은 이제 제 내용을 좀 참고를 하시고요. 하나하나 좀 추격을 하고 해서 발표를 하려고 하는데요. 우크라이나 사태, 물론 우크라이나를 불법 침공을 한 러시아의 책임이죠. 그럼에도 왜 우크라이나 사태가 터질 수밖에 없었는지 그걸 객관적으로 볼 필요가 있지 않을까. 2008년에 원래 그 냉전이 끝날 때 이제 독일이 통일이 되고 1991년에 독일하고 미국이 당시 소련한테 약속을 한 게 있다고 합니다. 소련이 동구권에서 군사력을 철수할 때 그걸 기화로 해가지고 나토가 더 확장하지 않겠다. 엘베강 너머로 확장하지 않겠다. 약속을 했다고 해요. 그런데 그 이후 나토가 확장을 계속 해가지고 어느 정도까지 갔냐면은 과거 이제 나토에 맞서는 바르샤바 조약 기구이죠. 공산 동구권 국가들 그 나라들이 거의 다 나토에 가입을 하게 되고 그 남은 나라가 두 나라 정도밖에 몰도바하고 두 나라 정도밖에 안 남고 문제는 이제 2008년 나토 정상회의에서 우크라이나와 조지아를 나토에 가입시키겠다 발표를 했어요. 2008년 부구레스티에서 이때 러시아가 그건 레드라인이다. 그건 도저히 실존의 위협이 되기 때문에 절대적으로 그건 받아들일 수 없다. 이렇게 이제 선언을 했었어요. 네, 2021년 블링컨 미 국무장관하고 우크라이나 그 전략적 파트너십 그걸 발표하면서 우크라이나 나토에 가입한다 선언을 하면서 그것이 아마 우크라이나 전쟁의 계기가 되지 않았나. 러시아는 2008년에 얘기한 대로 우리는 실존의 위협을 더 이상 감당할 수 없다. 이렇게 돼서 이제 우크라이나 사태가 이제 터져가지고 지금도 진행되고 있는데 가장 심각한 문제는요. 핵전쟁 문제가 거론되고 있는 거예요. 그 얘기도 나오죠. 러시아가 실전의 위협을 받는다면 핵도 쓸 수 있다. 뭐 이런 암시를 하고 있어요. 문제는 핵전쟁 위험성입니다. 근데 관련해가지고 핵무기 비확산 체제 1970년 5월에 이제 발효가 됐는데 가장 중요한 것은 1967년 1월까지에서의 핵무기를 보유한 국가만 인정을 하는 거예요. 그게 이제 다섯 나라죠. 핵무기 보유 국가이면서 안전보장 상임 이사국들입니다. 이 핵무기 확산 금지 조약의 명분은 핵무기를 가진 나라가 핵무기를 갖지 않은 나라에 대해서 절대 위협을 주지 말아야 되고, 그리고 핵무기를 평화롭게 이용할 수 있는 권리 권한을 보장해 줘야 되는 거 아니겠어요? 그래야 핵무기 확산 금지 조약의 명분이 서는 거죠. 근데 과정을 보면요. 우선 요즘 이제 핵무기 확산 금지 조약, 핵무기 비확산 체제가 자칫하면 붕괴되는 거 아니냐, 이런 이제 문제가 나오는데, 핵무기 확산 금지 조약 그 체계 근본적인 문제와 한계점이 있는 겁니다. 첫 번째는 불평등 조약이에요. 핵무기를 가진 나라일수록 국제 질서의 평화 안정을 위해서 더욱 의무를 갖고 노력을 해야 되는데 그렇지 않아요. 오히려 핵무기 갖지 않는 나라에 대한 통제 체제를 가하면서 지금까지 보세요. 핵무기 군비 경쟁은 누가 하고 있죠? 핵 보유 국가들끼리 하고 있습니다. 그러면서 핵무기 갖지 않은 나라에 대해서는 조그만 낌새가만 있으면 사정없이 제재를 가하고 통계를 가하고 불평등한 거 아닌가요? 두 번째는 핵무기 비확산을 위해서 조약도 만들고 체제를 운영을 하고 있는데 정작 핵무기 확산이 쭉 되어 온 것은 누구 때문인가요? 핵 보유 국가들이 지원해 줬기 때문에 이게 확산이 된 거예요. 최근에 오커스 군사 동맹체가 발족이 됐습니다. 미국, 호주, 영국, 앵글로 섹슨 민족주의 성향의 군사 동맹체예요. 근데 중요한 것은 이 오커스가 발족하면서 발표한 게 있죠. 미국, 영국이 호주의 전략 잠수함 개발 지원을 하겠다. 호주를 도와서 핵 잠수함 개발을 하도록 지원해 주겠다. 핵무기 확산 금지 조약의 1조에 보면요. 핵무기를 가진 나라는 핵을 갖지 않은 나라한테 핵과 관련된 기술 이전을 못하게 되어 있어요. 또 제2조는 핵무기를 가진 핵 미보유국은 핵을 가진 핵 보유 국가로부터 기술 이전을 받으면 안 되게 되어 있습니다. 제1조, 2조 이거 위반한 거 아닌가요? 핵 보유국가들은 자기들 마음대로 위반하면서 왜 보호하지 않는 나라는 그렇게 제재를 가하고 가장 중요한 건요. 핵을 갖지 않은 나라를 핵을 갖고 위협하려 하면 안 되잖아요. 하고 있었어요. 해왔어요. 그러면서 핵을 갖지 않은 나라한테 뭐라고 얘기할 그 명분 자격이 있는 겁니까? 내가 먼저 질문을 하고 싶어요. 최소한도 안전을 보장해줘야 그 다음에 무슨 제재를 가야 되고 이유가 되는 건데 그렇게 건드리면 위협하고 그러면서 야 너희들은 핵 개발을 하면 안 돼. 그 핵뿐만 아니라 너희들은 군비 경제들은 자기들은 마음대로 하면서 너희들 군비 키우면 안 되는 거야 하고 이렇게 얘기할 수 있는 겁니까? 대표적인 경우가 2001년 1월에 그 당시 부시 대통령이 미국 의회에서 발표한 게 있는데 그때 악의축 발표를 하면서 악의축이 뭐 바로 어떤 나라냐면 북한, 이란, 이라크 뭐 이렇게 되거든요. 선제 공격을 할 수 있다는 얘기를 하는 거예요. 제가 이 얘기를 자꾸 말씀드리는 이유는 선제 공격을 하고 있겠다는데 그러면은 상대방은 가만히 있겠습니까? 미국, 러시아도 조금만 건드리면 뭐 불량한 것과 위협을 해가지고 막 그러면서 그 위협을 직접적으로 이게 잠재적인 위협이 아니라 명백하게 현존하는 위협을 가하고 있는데 가만히 있을 수가 있겠어요? 자기 위협을 느끼는데. 시간이 좀 길어질 것 같아서 일단 유엔 문제를 좀 얘기를 하겠어요. 유엔은 국제 질서의 평화와 안녕을 유지하기 위해서 존재하는 국제 기구죠. 근데 이 유엔은 상임이사국의 막강한 거부권을 가지고 운영이 되고 있습니다. 이번 우크라이나 사태에서 유엔은 무엇을 했죠? 아무것도 없습니다. 유엔이 하는 거. 과연 유엔이 세계 평화의 질서를 위해서 과연 무엇을 하는 기구인지 근본적인 문제를 얘기 안 할 수가 없고 더욱 문제는 이번 우크라이나 전쟁 러시아의 불법 침략이에요. 그런데 러시아가 상임이사국이기 때문에 유엔을 통한 제재가 안 됩니다. 근데 하나 질문하고 싶은 것은 이번에 우크라이나 사태 물론 유엔을 통한 건 아니지만 이제 유럽 동맹국들을 통해서 여러 가지 제재를 좀 가하고 있죠. 근데 마찬가지로 2003년 3월인가 미국이 이라크 불법 침공을 했어요. 명분은 대량 살상 무기를 제거하고 또 후세인 적군을 제거하고 그런 명분으로 이라크 전쟁을 했습니다. 그것도 불법이죠. 근데 막상 이라크 침공을 하고 보니까 대량 살상 무기가 이제 그 침공의 구실이었는데 없었어요. 대량 살상 무기 존재하지 않았습니다. 이제 묻고 싶은 질문의 핵심은 우크라이나를 불법 침공한 러시아 유엔에서 제재도 못 구하고 아무도 통제도 못하고 마찬가지로 미국의 이라크 불법 침공 그 당시 아마 유럽연합 국가들은 거기에 동의하지 않고 심지어 캐나다, 멕시코까지도 동의하지 않았습니다. 당연히 참여하지도 않고 그렇긴 했지만 불법 침공한 미국에 대해서 어떤 제재도 없었죠. 근데 한번 근본적으로 문제고 싶은 것은 제1차 핵전쟁 위기가 있었죠. 1962년 쿠바. 그것이 뭐 비핵국가로부터 나온 위협입니까? 미국과 소련끼리 핵전쟁 위험성이 터진 거예요. 근데 그 핵전쟁이 터지면 미국과 소련이 문제 아니라 지구 전체에 그 파괴가 일어나는 거예요. 그럼 이제 다행히 이제 그 제1차 핵전쟁 위기는 넘겼지만 제2차 핵전쟁, 지금 우크라이나의 사태에서 핵전쟁 얘기가 자꾸 나오잖아요. 어느 나라고 어느 나라의 전쟁, 핵전쟁 위협입니까? 미국하고 러시아예요. 핵을 갖고 있는 나라가 아닌 미보유 국가에서 나오는 게 아니에요. 여기서 하나 질문 던지고 싶은 것은 지금 국제 질서의 평화를 가장 깨치는 나라가 과연 어떤 나라냐? 근본적인 질문을 드리고 싶고, 그래서 지금 이런 상태로 되면 이제 신냉전이 이제 계속 격화될 수밖에 없는데, 아까 평화 문제, 세계 평화 문제, 우리가 냉전의 평화라고 얘기를 하는데, 냉전의 평화가 진짜 평화인가요? 특히 한반도에서는 평화라고 얘기할 수가 없어요. 건투하면은 그 군사적 긴장 위기가 막 반복되고, 제일 안타까운 것은 아직도 이산 가족들이 못 만나고 있어요. 이걸 평화라고 얘기할 수 있습니까? 그러면 신냉전이 되는데 신냉전이 과정도 그렇고 결과도 그렇고 그게 평화라고 얘기할 수 있을까요? 그래서 우리가 이제야말로 진정한 평화의 개념이 무엇인지, 이념이 무엇인지 근본적인 성찰을 할 때라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 소극적 평화의 개념이 있고 적극적 평화의 개념이 있는데, 이제 적극적 평화의 개념은 이제 1960년대 후반 이때쯤 나온 거거든요. 거기서 주장하는 적극적인 평화는 직접적인 물리적인 폭력인 전쟁으로부터의 그 평화가 아니라 인간이 타고난 여러 가지 자질과 재능을 발휘하지 못하는 구조적인 억압적인 그런 그 폭력으로부터 자유로워야 된다. 그래서 인간의 누구나 타고난 자질과 재능을 발휘할 수 있는, 그래서 인간다운 생활을 할 수 있는 그 상태가 진정한 적극적 평화다, 이런 개념을 주장을 합니다. 이런 개념을 바탕으로 해서 지금까지 말씀드린 대로 지금 세계 질서란 제도든 기구든 진정한 평화를 위해서 지금 하고 있는 거냐? 그것을 바탕 가지고 진정한 평화의 미래를 우리가 기대할 수 있겠는가? 그 근본적인 생각을 해볼 필요가 있을 것 같고요. 그래서 아까 핵무기 확산 금지 조약 체계, 그리고 유엔 안보리 제대로 좀 평화를 위해서 아무 구실도 못하고 있는 안보리, 이 문제. 그래서 이제 유엔의 개혁 얘기가 나오는데요. 이거 좀 사실상 현실적으로 불가능합니다. 왜? 그 상임이사국의 거부권 행사하면 안 되거든요. 그래서 유엔 개혁은 사실상 불가능합니다. 그런 현실이고. 그래서 우리가 진정한 평화의 개념을 바탕으로 해서 어떻게 하면 진정한 세계 평화 질서를 새로 모색할 수 있을까? 이제 이 말씀을 드리고 싶고, 그래서 아이디어 차원에서 아까 얘기한 진정한 평화의 개념을 바탕으로 한 평화 지대를 새롭게 구축해 나가면서 이걸 확장시켜 나가는 평화 네트워크 형성을 통해서 피스 버스시다라고 제가 이제 표현을 했는데요. 이게 논문에서 피스, 진정한 평화의 세상, 피스 유니버스, 피스 버스 시대를 열기 위해서, 진정한 평화의 시대를 열기 위해서 우리가 근본적인 평화 개념부터 시작해서 이를 위한 제도적인 제도, 그런 그 세계 질서를 우리가 모색해야 되지 않을까. 아이디 차원에서 지금 말씀을 드리고 싶고, 그리고 사실 특히 한반도는 가장 직접적인 평화의 유업을 건너면 받고 있는 나라이기 때문에 특히 절실한 문제라고 생각을 합니다. 이상 가능한 축약해서 말씀드린다고 했는데요. 모자란 것은 논문을 좀 참고를 해주시고, 혹시 궁금한 점이 있으면은 제가 질문을 통해서 보완해서 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다.
감사합니다. Thank you for President Chung Sang-mo. He raised the issues of the limitation of the current world order, as including UN Security Council and the NPT, and that kind of the organization is not good enough to keep the peace in the world. So he proposed some new meanings, universe, the peaceful universe. So that is peace verse. So he says that we need some new wisdom for the new that kind of peace verse era. So have it, please, and we wait. Yeah. So we have second speakers, Rob York. He's a program director for regional affair at the Pacific Forum. He's waiting at the Zoom. So his title for the presentation is the U.S., South Korea, and IPEF, the future of economic cooperations in Indo-Pacific. Okay, but Rob York, is your turn for the presentation. Can you hear us? Okay, go ahead.
안녕하십니까 여러분. 제가 하와이에서 살지만 어제부터 감기 걸렸어요. 제 코로나 테스트는 네거티브이지만 줌 통해 발표하겠습니다.
Okay, thank you.
네, 기침을 하면 실례합니다. Okay. With that, since I was asked to discuss the topic of trade, I have decided to focus on the issue of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity and what it might mean for the U.S. role in the region, and also for the U.S.-Korea alliance, as well as other alliances that the U.S. enjoys in the Indo-Pacific region. So with that, I'll begin. The Biden administration in May unveiled its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. And by unveiled, I mean that the plan and also its partners, who I will discuss at greater length in a moment, have been announced, as well as the broad goals that the initiative is intended to accomplish. However, how the framework will achieve any of these goals is, as of yet, unclear. Nonetheless, one hopes that the initiative will find buy-in from its partners and from those who participate in other trading orders in the region, as well as countries that have not always enjoyed the closest relationship with the United States. And through their cooperation, a substantive and effective trading order can, for the region, be sustained. The fact sheet released upon the announcement of the IPEF identified 4 areas in which collaboration is intended to take place. The focus, as identified in that document, includes trade, specifically high standard, inclusive, free, and fair commitments, as well as promoting sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Supply chains, in this case, specifically making supply chains more resilient and well integrated while coordinating crisis response measures and responses that minimize disruptions, which is certainly an important task considering the effects of COVID-19 and the subsequent product shortages that we have encountered. There's also clean energy, decarbonization, and infrastructure. Central to much of this administration's efforts, this plank calls for efforts to decarbonize economies and build resilience in climate impacts. A stated priority of governments, and not just Washington's, for many years has been to take a new urgency regarding climate change due to the time that has been lost in instituting a response to climate change and the imminence of its impacts. There's also a plank on tax and anti-corruption. Tax, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery regimes are to be enacted, but also enforced. This plank is something of an odd man out in the IPEF overall, having not featured prominently in previous administration priorities and also not fitting that comfortably with the other planks in the agreement. Revelations such as those that we saw in the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers, however, as well as concerns about what happens to foreign aid and investment after it is distributed, may have contributed to its inclusion. The initiative and its individual planks will probably find many well-wishers, even among those who are not directly invested in its success. A cleaner environment for the next generation, for smoother operation of supply chains, even in the event of a worldwide pandemic or similar large-scale disruption, and a trading regime that supports reduced inequality. The IPEF seemingly hits all the high notes regarding 21st century economic goals, and none too soon. It has become something of a trope, a regular talking point among those of us who work in the security sector, that the US is keen to meet the security goals of the region in the sense of the weapons that need to be used and assurances that they would be used at the appropriate times. But Washington, they say, continues to fail at engaging the region economically. It is believed that this failure puts the US and its like-minded partners in the region at a disadvantage, considering the People's Republic of China's Belt and Road Initiative is spending a large amount of money in countries throughout the region, leading to new partnerships for Beijing. The PRC's arrangement with the Solomon Islands is just the latest, and one cannot assume the last. The PRC is also a signatory to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the biggest trading bloc in the world, unlike the US, and Beijing's influence over the bloc is only enhanced by the additional absence of India. The PRC also seeks membership in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, in which the US is not a participant nor has showed any serious signs of seeking entry since it withdrew in 2017. It is therefore at least somewhat heartening that the US has chosen to unveil the IPEF and that it has been rolled out with a fairly substantial list of partners, including longtime US allies like South Korea, Singapore, Japan, and Australia, but also countries whose partnerships it has had a hard time, like Vietnam, plus the Philippines, who have shown troubling signs of drifting into the orbit of the PRC in recent years. A comprehensive trade bloc, including each of these countries, would be welcome news indeed for those concerned about the future of the region. However, the framework has been greeted with much skepticism already. For what's been by observers in industry and government that the deal does not promise US market access, something that the US's presumptive partners would probably prefer over discussions of stamping out money laundering and trade that Americans consider unfair. Others, being less sold on the value and merit of free trade, say it might actually do the wrong kind of enriching. The magazine, The American Conservative, which is associated with America's right of center America First movement, says that corporations such as Amazon may benefit at the expense of the working class, including Americans. Others state that the IPEF's goal-oriented but scant on details early statements render the impressive list of partners underwhelming. Van Jackson of Wellington University says it is a slogan without a purpose that has attracted partners because it does not entail any costs, such as quotas, labor laws, or changes to monetary policy. There are, of course, reasons why the IPEF thus far seems so short on specifics, and the Biden administration has seemingly sought regional economic integration on the cheap. For the most part, they come down to that most banal of reasons, partisan politics. Jackson's perspective has gained increasing currency on the American left in recent years, with political standard bearers such as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren calling for rethinking trade policy as the US has practiced it for the last several decades, and seeking trade agreements with partners at a similar level of development with the US. They argue that deals between countries with a development imbalance mostly benefit our corporate sector. Joe Biden cannot himself be said to be part of this group on the left. Indeed, those in that faction were highly wary of his candidacy throughout the 2020 campaign and remain less enthused by his policies. However, their growing influence probably does much to explain his administration's hesitance to make concrete suggestions, even as fears of America's receding interest over the reason increase in intensity. At a time when voter turnout decides elections, a Democratic president would not be wanting to be seen as selling out his country's economic well-being. The quote from the American Conservative is also instructive. Marketing itself as Main Street conservatism, distinct, one imagines, from the Wall Street conservatism of other movements in America, the American Conservative became an increasingly enthusiastic supporter of President Donald Trump over the course of his presidency, particularly his efforts to reduce America's foreign policy commitments, his crackdowns on immigration, and his skepticism of multilateral trade deals. President Trump's successes in the 2016 election cycle, it has been noted, had much to do with his claims that his predecessors had emphasized bad deals that benefited other countries at the US's expense, and his own success at breaking through the once reliably Democratic states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania had to do with lost manufacturing jobs and his promise to put America first. At the start of Biden's term, there were nonetheless hopes that he might be able to be more ambitious on trade. Eventually, over time, if COVID receded and if the administration successfully advanced an agenda that enabled U.S. recovery from the recession that the pandemic had created, Biden and his party might defy the usual turn of events in which the parties of the president suffers in the midterm elections halfway through their first term. If so, the Biden administration could have spent its political capital on other goals, including a more expansive trade agenda for the Indo-Pacific. Unfortunately for them, this was not to be. COVID variants continue to stalk the US and its trading partners. Inflation has snuffed out any excitement that there might have been over persistent GDP growth and decreased unemployment, and there are few solutions available to supply chain disruptions, other than letting them recover on their own time, which could mean 2023 or 2024. Unfortunately, for all of us concerned about the US's role in the region, that means trade policy may suffer from a dearth of ambition. It wasn't always like this. In the post-World War II environment, the United States responded to the emerging challenges facing the global order and the emerging threat posed by international communism by taking an active interest in the economic affairs of partner countries. The initiatives is perhaps the Marshall Plan, which funneled the equivalent of $115 billion in today's money into the reconstruction of Western Europe. In addition to a large-scale security pact like NATO, economic assistance was seen as necessary to keep the areas of the European continent not under communist rule able to continue resisting their domination. It aided the state of Israel after its formation, not only to support the idea of a Jewish state, but also to foster a democracy in the Middle East. And in the Asia and Pacific regions, in lieu of a comprehensive multilateral security pact like NATO, the US adopted what Victor Cha calls a hub and spokes system, binding allies in the region to itself, if not to each other directly. In addition to providing security commitments to South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and others, economic aid flowed to South Korea, to Taiwan, and to Korea. Not every investment achieved the desired results. South Vietnam would not last, and the Philippines' dictatorial regime of the 1960s through the 1980s siphoned much of the country's economic potential into its leaders' personal fortune. However, too few Americans seem to appreciate how the investments of the Cold War era have paid off to their benefit, especially in East Asia. Taiwan, in addition to its status as a thriving liberal democracy, is now central to the semiconductor supply chain that has given us the luxuries many of us used to wait out the pandemic and keep working, even when we couldn't leave home. South Korea also contributes to this supply chain, but also to the global economy as an exporter of cars, integrated circuits, refined petroleum, and car parts. And that's not including its numerous cultural exports. Who could have foreseen any of this in 1950 before either South Korea or Taiwan boomed economically and both appeared at a distinct risk of absorption into their rivals for legitimacy? And the legacy of involvement in economic affairs of partner countries does not stop with direct involvement. Most discussions of US efforts to entice South Korea and Japan into greater cooperation before 1965 focus on the struggle to get Korea's Lee Seung-man regime to cooperate, but the enticement was surely directed at Japan as well. Extensive aid from both the US and Japan translated into rapid industrialization in South Korea, transforming the country from one of the world's poorest in the early 1960s into the technological innovator today. South Korea's successes at building heavy industries in the 1960s, then high-tech in the subsequent decades, should primarily be attributed to Korean workers, entrepreneurs, engineers, and policymakers that facilitated it. Americans should be reminded, though, that in the hands of productive recipients and partners, economic contributions are investments and not just gifts. Sadly, this lesson has been forgotten by our political class and those of the older generation who support them, and was perhaps never taught to those of the younger generation unaware of the US's past assistance and its results. Instead, they indulge of crude and misleading stereotypes of their partners, including of South Korea, as takers who have benefited while Middle America decayed. Both Taiwan and South Korea are also treated as security risks due to their proximity to other regimes that rival them for legitimacy and have convinced US leaders to take an interest in defending them. And of course, there is one additional example of US aid and support to Asia, a country Washington threw its weight behind in the hopes of building up a counterweight to a regional rival. Once that rival fell away, it was hoped that the aid recipient would come to resemble the US and follow liberal democracies, even if it took an unconventional path there. If one wants an example of how economic integration has not always succeeded as the US and its partners had intended, there's always going to be past US support for Beijing. One of the most unexpected criticisms of the IPEF comes from Wang Huiyao at the Beijing-based Center for China and Globalization, who says that the US needs the cooperation of the PRC in order to succeed. Wang argues that with Beijing's buy-in, the IPEF can achieve the stated goals of mitigating climate change, bolstering supply chains, fair trade, and so on, and without it, the IPEF cannot succeed in any of these. This, however, misunderstands the near-term purposes of IPEF and the goals of PRC itself. The PRC has its own goals for poverty reduction within its borders, for clean energy, and the Xi administration has certainly made a show of anti-corruption efforts, but none of these can be said to surmount the primary objectives of the CCP, which are to ensure its own power and eventually surpass the US as a regional hegemon. The IPEF is not officially an anti-China plan for the Indo-Pacific, but its goals should be read with great power competition in mind. This is also true of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and last year's AUKUS agreement. When the Quad speaks about the need to guarantee a free and open Indo-Pacific and announces measures to bolster it, it should be seen as them holding fast against forces in the region that exist waterways, not to mention territorial rights of their neighbors. When Biden declares that AUKUS was established to address both current and strategic environment in the region and how it may evolve, the context should be the impact of other powers in the region, which are set to grow as they expand their military budgets and nuclear capacities, in line with plans to move up their technological value chains. Likewise, the IPEF's objectives should be interpreted with this competition in mind. They are meant to push back against the power seen as undermining free and fair trade in the region via purchasing, IP theft, and subsidizing its own industries while blocking market access to outsiders. When it talks about sustainable energy, it should be seen as seeking to achieve that energy that will fuel the 21st century and beyond, before its rivals in the region do. And even corruption should be seen in this context. While Xi Jinping has enacted a wide-ranging anti-corruption campaign domestically, his regime has enabled corruption elsewhere. Just on the Asian continent, this includes the Myanmar junta, the Cambodian regime of Hun Sen, and the elites in North Korea. The IPEF need not rule out the participation of China over the long term, but faulting the agreement for the PRC's absence now is like faulting NATO for not including the Soviet Union or Warsaw Pact countries in 1949. Better now to get the United States and its steadfast allies, such as South Korea, Singapore, Australia, and Japan, into dialogue with countries whose cooperation has been less certain, including Vietnam and India. Whatever one thinks of its policies overall, the administration of Yoon Suk-yeol has embraced this challenge and indicated that it sees the PRC as a regional player whose goals don't align with Korea's, even as the Yoon government explores mending fences with Japan and boosting ties with other Quad countries and Southeast Asia. One suspects that there will be much hashing out of the IPEF in the months and years to come, but this should not be treated as a defeat for the initiative, at least not yet. The IPEF is a tentative step toward economic integration, but a tentative step is not nothing and may lead to additional steps that carry the region forward as a whole. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bob. A great explanation and insight about the IPEFs. So, do we have Swinongs in correct? Oh, thank you. Oh, the Swinong is in China now, so he cannot attend here, but he's connected through the Zoom, so we might have some different views and opinions about, especially about the IPEF. So as Rob York explained well about IPEF, but Swinong might have some different views about those China's point of view. So let's invite Swinongs for the presentation. Hi, how are you? Can you hear us? Okay. Oh, no, it's okay. I wonder, did you hear our presentation by the Rob? Okay. Okay, so we can hear your views and your presentations. Okay. Okay, so go ahead your presentations. We're here first.
Written form of my presentation. And the title is The Continued Downturn of U.S.-China Relations and Beijing's Approach to the Ukraine Conflict. And divided into several parts. The first part is summit proves fruitless or even ominous. The second is emerging new Cold War. The third is the mighty forces driving the deterioration. The next is China in Ukraine crisis, and Ukraine war.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part, the summit proves fruitless or even ominous. In spite of the few concrete instances of cooperation, all quite limited, decisive, likely temporary. The 16 November 2021 online summit between President Xi Jinping and Biden demonstrated how wide disagreements between China and the United States, or how difficult it is for both countries to achieve a lasting shared understanding in any major issue area, and even how easily several of them can deteriorate further from already high level of tension. The issue of Taiwan, of course, is the most prominent and significant hotspot. The White House declared 4 days before the bilateral online summit that President Biden will not search concrete results from the meeting. Rather, his main concern was about setting up the conditions for effecting competition. And this was compatible with general principle repeatedly declared by the Biden administration that stiff competition, as National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan described it on November 11th, is a fundamental assumption about China in the White House. In short, the best way to prevent US-China military conflict is a combination of deterrence and diplomacy. And this means that on the issue of Taiwan in particular, and the US-China strategic military rivalry in general, the Biden administration will strongly pursue a situation in which the United States can safely broaden and deepen the almost comprehensive support it gives Taiwan, including military support, together with broadening and deepening the rivalry against China in the Indo-Pacific region, and even beyond, without risk of military conflict. Such a guideline has been prominent in Biden's statements during the summit, and even more so of it in its administration's words and deeds. Moreover, during the short time span of only about 1.5 months, the Biden administration has displayed a very hard-line approach, harder than almost ever before, on such issues as Xinjiang, realignment of supply chains, mainly against China, high-tech containment toward China, and Indo-Pacific regional rivalry. So now I turn to the second section of my presentation, emerging new Cold War. I have repeated again and again in the past few months that I personally believe a Cold War between the United States and China is emerging. It's a new Cold War, the precision of which depends on whether one puts emphasis on the word new or on the phrase Cold War. If one emphasizes new, one could find numerous differences between US-Chinese relations and the original Cold War between the United States and the former Soviet Union. Although many people today tend to overstate those. On the other hand, if one emphasizes the term Cold War, it's easier to find that the current rivalry and confrontation between Washington and Beijing already has some major and essential features of the old Cold War between Washington and Moscow. And even more so of the many rivalries between two antagonistic greatest powers in world history. We already have between Washington and Beijing ever more severe geopolitical and geostrategic hostile actions, an intensifying arms race, a growing ideological contest, mounting struggles in area of high tech, more hostile and nationalistic public opinion in both countries, which political leaders partly drive and partly are driven by. With respect to both the current situation and historical experiences, what we knew in the US-China emerging Cold War mainly concerned the political decoupling from economic interdependence, making more and more political areas fragmented and group-oriented, separated. In contrast with the strategic stalemate in Europe before the 1980s, the strategic dynamics now unfolding in East Asia and the Pacific are ominously fluid and unpredictable. This situation sharply challenged intellectual and other capabilities of the current political and strategic leadership in every major powers, which combines with pandemic and climate change related disasters to complicate things much further and often stun leadership's ability to factor in all long-term consequences of their actions. And new is the much higher degree of technological, of great power warfare or para warfare, which dramatically increases the dynamics of rivalry. The remnants of economic interdependence and liberal globalization now look weaker than all the forces against stabilization. Next part. The multiple forces driving the deterioration. People are more often than not inclined to grasp to easy and simplistic explanations. The most prevailing one throughout history is the so-called one-cause theory. Although the technological factors have been a very important element behind the competition between China and the United States, it's extremely difficult to assume that historical rivalry between two such huge powers results from a single fact, however significant it is. A more fundamental and continuing power transition dynamics matter a lot. So do domestic political and social systems, or essential way of political economic organization at home, as well as their educational background and domestic political requirements they generate. Ideological competition, differences in political and even cultural traditions, major domestic vested interests of various powerful groups are all critical factors underlying the US-China contest. And finally, ominous interactions of rival major powers, especially in an environment characterized primarily by jungle politics and a shortage of political resources broadly defined, as it's increasingly now should also be factored in. It's difficult or even impossible to create a strict order of importance among these 5 or 6 main drivers of US-China competition. This alone explains why the planned rivalry between Washington and Beijing is far from easy to deal with, let alone to solve. Then I turn to the last part of my presentation, which I suppose and is the most interesting to all. The China in Ukraine crisis and on the war there. Mr. Putin, an adventurist autocrat, has been playing an optimistic imperial gamble, which is making him less space of choice, more hostile international environment, and a potential political unrest at home, is driving his country and himself, I believe, to a dead end. In their respective increasingly intensive rivalry with the United States, and in somewhat less degree with the rest of the world. It is the simple arithmetic of international politics. Beijing and Moscow has closer tie to level of a parallel alliance. But the arithmetic still have a major complicated element in general. So up to now, there's no indication the Russians commit in any degree to support the Chinese by military directly over conflict on Taiwan and elsewhere, and vice versa on Ukraine and elsewhere on the part of China. As for Ukraine conflict, the Chinese government has declared that Russia's legitimate security concern shall be paid attention and even resolved. Furthermore, it publicly supports Putin's demand for a legally bound new European security framework. In effect, the numerous Eastern European members of NATO shall be withdrawing from NATO, and even NATO itself be replaced by what Putin has demanded. And this can be viewed as quite crushing, of course. However, they have immediately mitigated somewhat by other statements, which I believe characterize China's behavior and toward the Russian war in Ukraine from February 24th to March 18th. Another statement that all parties should remain calm and not do anything to increase tension further and aggravate the crisis. So all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity shall be respected, and that whole situation shall be peacefully dealt with according to the principle of UN Charter, that humanitarian assistance shall be accessible to Ukraine without any obstacle, and replace the people there, resettled well, and comprehensively. Taking into account of Putin's strong military will and his potential displeasure toward such a posture, and China's parallel allied relationship with him in general, though not particularly over his behavior toward Ukraine, one can seriously doubt that Beijing is able or even willing to play a role of substantially restraining Putin in attack against Ukraine and his political purposes in doing so. China does not publicly oppose in any way Russia's invasion of Ukraine, nor support that. China opposes any Western sanctions against Russia for whatever reason. But will not do things directly to derail them. Though indirect undermining in some areas could be predicted as a certainty. Only for the strategic patterns outside of Ukraine or even Eastern Europe as a whole. And after very very high degree of prudence in trade with Russia since February 24. In recent weeks, it is reported that, and especially since the April, it is reported that the China dramatically increased the imports from Russia of coal and low oil. And it is said by Russian side Chinese ambassador indicated that China is prepared to provide to Russia some air civilian and assistance to Russia's civilian airline. And as you know that the United States just 2 days ago or 1 day ago declared to launch a second sanction against 5 small Chinese enterprises which conducted their trade relations with Russia after the February 21st, when Russia launched all-out attack. The Chinese perspective could be that Putin diverts pressure of the United States from China substantially for a period at least, or involves China further into a polarized confrontational structural power politics in the world, which would make China remarkably more difficult. The formal function, the partly diverse US pressure from China, is so easy to be present, while the later, that is a polarized confrontational structure, and hurt China and much more, is always ambiguous for its perceived double effects. So such a complex mentality is unable to produce a policy to definitely restrain Putin over Ukraine. Anyway, taking very pro-Russian position shortly before Putin launched military attack on Ukraine, perhaps largely due to his misinformation tactics as it were, then trying to keep a little but increasing distance from Russia on Ukraine, and since Putin waged all the warfare there, and then returned to a quite pro-Russian posture after Biden on March 18th in his video exchange with top leader in China, questioning China's position and threatened ruthlessly secondary sanction against China if it would be judged as substantially supporting Russia's capability to conducting the war. These are the 3 stages of the evolution of China's related policy since February 4th. And finally, I will talk about Ukraine and Taiwan. By sending a delegation headed by former chairman of Joint Chief of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, to Taiwan on March 1st, and through National Security Council Indo-Pacific Coordinator Kurt Campbell on February 28th. The Biden administration was just in the heat of Russian war in Europe, assuring Taiwan and a doubtful opinion at home and beyond that it has both capability and will to intervene vigorously in 2 major theaters simultaneously, with Indo-Pacific still kept as its strategic priority in longer term. This was also intended to send a message of so-called deterrence to China, which certainly takes it into account in calculation. The somewhat surprising situation in the battlefield of Ukraine and the inclination of US-Russia confrontation toward conflict make people, of course, easily to connect the Ukraine war with Taiwan in their intensive speculation, let alone the threat of 2-theater warfare issued by Biden administration. However, I would like to emphasize the fundamental situation of Taiwan problem should be regarded as largely stable at its bottom, the most critical position and policy held by China has been proclaimed as early as 2005 by the anti-secession law enacted then, especially the solemn declaration that China would resort to force to prevent Taiwan's digital independence, or its controlling by a foreign power. On the other hand, the most critical position and policy of the United States throughout the past 2 decades and more has been that declared by every successful administration in Washington as opposing either side of Taiwan Strait to change the fundamental status quo unilaterally without being provoked. Moreover, both China and the United States have had through many years countless statements and actual military actions on that respectively. Therefore, have no doubt or confusion at large about the other side's determination to back the above respective principle. It can be said that they have established quite firmly the credibility of each state's bottom line in the other's mind. While both as great powers have for long already convinced that any substantial military conflict between them must be avoided absolutely until or unless it would be required absolutely. This is a structural necessity, constituting the single cause for the basic stability of the situation on Taiwan problem. It will most probably not be subverted by smaller intensification of confrontation, and even in despite of their inevitability or ever higher frequency. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Srino, for your excellent and insightful presentation about the U.S. stance. So now we have the last presentation from the Japan, but he's not connected. So there's no way we can hear his presentation. So the Satoshi Shirai is a professor of the Tokyo Seika University, is unable to attend this seminar even through the Zoom. So please read his presentation in the proceedings. That must be very insightful. The title was Challenges and the Future of Japan, U.S., Korea Friendship Orders. So we have to skip the presentation, so just let us to read in the print. Now, we have about more than 20 minutes time for discussing the issues about the presenters have. Let's do this way. We don't have any designated discussion at this time, so let me open the question and discussions to the floor. So if you have any questions and discussions, just attend and open discussions. So if you have any questions or the discussions, raise your hand and then identify your name and affiliations, and then please decide the question or discussions about whose presentations. It's a Sino or President Chung Sang-mo or the ROPs. Okay, yes. Oh, Mike, please. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Shi In-hong.
Sinong.
Shi In-hong.
Oh,
My name is-
Hold on. Sinong, can you hear our questions? Okay, yes, go ahead.
Dr. Shi, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Sang-Sok Lee. I'm the CEO of the Seoul Economic News. You seem to, in your presentation, you seem to blame the United States for taking a hardline approach toward China. But Ambassador Ditrani, who's sitting right next to me, said this morning that there is no need for the US to contain China. He seemed to stress mutual cooperation between the two countries instead. In your view, who's to blame in the first place for the deteriorating situations existing between the two superpowers? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Answer now at time. Yes, and this is a good question. But I have to state that all I have said is just a description, and with some interpretation.
Yes.
And this is a fact that, especially since the beginning of 2018, and by Trump, and actually did very much go to world, and where a pandemic and happened broke out in the United States in March of 4th and March and 4th of 2020, and successive by the Biden administration. The United States has, and almost comprehensively, to contain China, to squeeze China, to isolate China, and to trying to do some blowback against China. This is a fact. And of course, if you ask why the United States do that, and there are a lot of fundamental reasons. But one is something just like an international interaction. And interaction in negative terms, in terms of deterioration between Washington and Beijing. So it's a mutual, and the results of both actions of the United States and China. And of course, also, and the results of action of so-called third parties. And most prominent, and is on US side is Japan, on Chinese side Russia. But one thing is certain, and if you look at this process of deterioration and interaction, if you want to ask who do the first, it's obviously that the United States firstly launched a trade war. And even before that, the United States first launched a pivot in Asia-Pacific. Although, and China had to do something to let the Obama and then President Trump do their action against China. But at the beginning of the things, and the United States and United States action is somewhat off balance and out of proportion. But who is first to be blamed? Who shall be blamed more? In some way, is not an important question. What mattered is the deteriorating confrontation rivalry itself and its negative effects upon international relations and upon each other's domestic politics. And even more ominous is that we have not seen any indication and to hope that in a practical time in the future, and the relationship could be and remarkably improved and for a longer time lasting. Whatever who have more responsibilities in the history of the deterioration of relationship between these two countries.
If I could, Dr. Ditrani, would you like to respond?
Okay. Is there any following? Yeah. Do you have the following questions about this?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity of responding. I was going to ask Professor Scher a question, but I will respond. You know, what is disappointing is the focus. You know, if one reads my presentation, which is in the book, it's pretty general. My comments this morning were a little more general. I didn't want to repeat what I have in the book. One could read it. My comments this morning on the U.S.-China relations are so important because, and I related it to the Korean Peninsula, because we've done some good work together in the six-party talks with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, State Councilor Wang Yi, and Ambassador Fu Ying and others, and we had some progress, significant progress there, and I think we could still do that, move forward. But there are irritants in the relationship that we cannot ignore. When China militarizes the islands in the South China Sea, and when China ignores what a United Nations tribunal rules on the South China Sea in favor of the Philippines, we just cannot sit there and not say anything. When the basic law in Hong Kong, established in 1997, President Jiang Zemin, and going back to Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher, is reversed with the national security law, people comment on that. Whether it's intellectual property theft, people will comment on that. And these are irritants in the relationship that diplomacy has to address. Our leaders have to address. But hopefully, they do not interfere with the areas of cooperation that are necessary for great powers. Cooperation on climate change, cooperation on pandemics, cooperation on peacefully resolving the nuclear issue with North Korea, so that we do have complete, verifiable denuclearization. But we give North Korea the security assurances, the economic opportunities that they deserve, and we lift the sanctions. So there are so many opportunities here to come together, and in those areas where we compete, it should be a level playing field. That means we should not be stealing intellectual property for the private sector's benefit or for companies' benefits and so forth. I can go down a whole list of things, or benefiting certain countries. But that's what diplomacy is all about. To talk about the irritants, competitiveness should be a level playing field, and our leaders should be coming together and telling the people of the world how we, as great powers, can come together to resolve issues that affect all mankind. I don't think that's unreasonable. But if we just focus on blaming, on saying we're correct. I mean, look, you mentioned, Professor, the war in Ukraine. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, I heard a presentation this morning, and we could go back and say, yes, NATO was moving east, and this and that. But the fact of the matter is, a small sovereign country, or a smaller sovereign country, was invaded by a bigger country with nuclear weapons. A country with nuclear weapons that they put nuclear weapons on the table saying, that's now operable. It's in play. And it's the same country that they invaded that we, the United States, the Soviet, the Russian Federation, and the United Kingdom gave security assurances to. We're saying, what is going on here? There's some problems here. But I mean, I think diplomacy has to kick in on working these problems. Yes. And our leaders of great powers need to come together and say, what do we do to help mankind? We don't have to keep reiterating, we know what the problems are. Let's find solutions to the problems. And let's address the issues that are affecting all mankind. That's my only point. So look, I think there are issues here. We can spend a lot of time talking about the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the militarization of the islands, the commitments that were made between President Xi and former President Obama and everything. We can go back to all that stuff. We can do that. We could do it for weeks. We could do it for weeks. But I think there's one imperative here for me coming to this forum is the Korean Peninsula. And the Korean Peninsula. And that's nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. And that's in North Korea. And I think China has, and the United States and the Russian Federation and other countries, obviously, but we, as great powers, we all have an obligation to resolve this issue peacefully so that we see complete, verifiable denuclearization. But we give North Korea the benefits, and they're not benefits. They're not benefits. We're not giving them security is not a benefit. All countries, sovereign states should be secure. And there shouldn't be sanctions imposed. You're absolutely right. Well, sanctions imposed on countries that didn't do it. But these sanctions were imposed by the UN because of the nuclear issues and the violations of UN Security Council resolutions. So that's my focus. I think this is why this forum is so important, is if we don't resolve the issues with North Korea, we could accidentally get into conflict with nuclear weapons. And we're seeing that in spades in Ukraine. Don't we want to get something going here in a positive way on the Korean Peninsula?
Okay, thank you for your comment. So is there any response from Shinong? You might have a lot of things to say, though.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to make response, focus on the situation in Korea Peninsula. And in this world, and there's a big difference between what should be and what it is and what will be, and especially for many times. And I think that the distinguished, the missile, you should stop to expect great powers and call the successful deal with the North Korean nuclear missile development program and in a black future. Because according to past 20 years, and the weather plant and Obama, or even before that, and the US presidents, after that, US presidents, and weather, and the previous Chinese top leader and the present Chinese top leader, and whether the RQ presidents before and after that. And great powers do all respective conflict things. And to make the situation more difficult to be solved. And also, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un and his father, are independent actors. And they generally do not heed whatever great power persuade or pressure, because they firmly believe that development of nuclear deterrence is what the regime in Pyongyang, the survival depends on. For China's part, and since the Kim Jong-un's first visit to Beijing in March 2018, at that time, since then, China changed its North Korean policy or peninsula policy, and not led the denuclearization as a priority. And in China's policy system toward the peninsula and toward North Korea. Then, shortly after the China-U.S. confrontation and at Anchorage diplomatic, the high-level dialogue, 1 or 2 weeks later, China began to jeopardize the denuclearization at large as an element of China's policy system toward the peninsula and and toward North Korea. And only several days ago, China and Russia and vetoed the American draft resolution and to impose new sanctions against North Korea, and which has been just greatly accelerated, and its nuclear missile development even launched one time a UN banned an intercontinental nuclear missile test without a nuclear hazard, of course, for test. And several times of also UN Security Council banned and the intermediate range missiles. So what is the prospect? I don't know. You can hope. You can see the end times of great power should do this way or that way. And even you can say that Kim Jong-un should do this way or that way. But really, and the fact is, and we departed from the wonderful objective of denuclearization of North Korea farther than before. So at least I personally have not seen any end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment and response. Is there any other questions? Swinong, please stay until we finish these sessions. And is there any other questions relating with Swinong's presentation or some other ones presentation? President Jung Sang-mo or the Rob's presentation? Yes. Please. Your name and operation and to whom your question is going. 예.
네. 그 세 분의 발표 잘 들었습니다. 저는 창원대학교에서 온 문경이라고 합니다. 전공은 국제관계학입니다. 저는 두 분께 질문이 있는데요. 먼저 정상모 선생님, 정상모 이사장님이시죠? 이사장님께 질문을 드리고 싶은 게 이 카탈로그의 제목을 보면 Peace Bus라고 적혀 있어서 이게 Peace Verse, 아마 유니버스의 verse를 아마 조금 미스펠링이 한 거 아닌가라는 생각이 들어서 그것과 함께 이제 직접 이 부분에 대해서 발제해서 많이 언급하지는 않으셨는데요. 지금 뉴냉전 시대에 우리가 Peace Verse 시대를 맞이하는 부분에 대해서 말씀을 하셨고, 그래서 어떤 좀 아이디어, 구상을 갖고 계신 건지, 이게 기존의 냉전 시대를 극복하고 지금 21세기에 우리가 어떻게 뭘 할 수 있을지에 대한 아이디어가 있으시다면 좀 말씀 부탁드리고요. 이제 조금 전에 그 스위농 그 교수님 말씀과 함께 여러 가지 논의가 있었는데, 저도 처음부터 가졌던 질문은 지금 신냉전 시대에 저희 이 동아시아에 있는 많은 구성원들이 불안함이 좀 있는 것 같습니다. 특히 최근에 이제 바이든 대통령이 한국에 오셔가지고 그 경제 동맹 또는 경제 연합 이 개념을 강조를 하셔서 군사 안보 동맹에서 이제 경제 동맹이라는 표현까지 나오는 걸 저도 보고, 이게 어떻게 앞으로 군사와 경제적 이런 상호 의존 관계들이 이 한반도의 동맹 관계에 영향을 미칠까, 좀 이런 질문이 들었습니다. 그래서 스위농 교수님께서 한반도의 남북 북한 정책도 중요하지만 한국에 대한 어떤 그런 전략 또는 외교적 입장 이런 부분에 대해서 좀 아이디어가 있으시다면 내용을 좀 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Okay, we gonna start from the President Jung Sang-mo first, and then Sinong, would you prepare for the questions? Okay, you start second. We'll start from the Jung Sang-mo first. 그 질문에 대해서 좀 뭐 그냥 일로 하시죠.
질문 고맙습니다. 피스 버스 시대는 피스하고 유니버스의 합성어라고 간략하게 말씀을 드릴 수 있고요. 피스버스 시대를 발상하게 된 것은 과거 냉전을 겪었고 또 신냉전을 겪게 되는데, 과거 냉전 때도 미국과 소련 어느 진영에도 속하지 않는 비동맹 운동이 있었죠. 결국 성공은 못했지만 냉전을 극복하기 위한 그런 운동이었다고 생각이 되고, 마찬가지로 또 신냉전이 전개되려고 하고 있는데, 지금 미국은 미국대로, 중국은 중국대로, 특히 그 뭐 경제 어떤 동맹 체제를 바탕으로 해서 서로 자기 편으로 끌어들이려고 하는 그런 현상이 있잖아요. 심지어는 자기 쪽으로 줄을 서도록 강요하는 그런 측면도 있고, 그런데 근본적인 문제는 냉전의 과정도 그렇지만 신냉전의 과정도 어느 편에 가담한다고 해서 그게 진정한 평화가 될 수 있겠느냐. 저는 그 패권 경쟁 자체가 평화를 위협하는 과정이라고 인식을 하고, 그걸 극복할 수 있는 방법이 뭐가 있을까. 그래서 우리가 창조적인 지혜와 노력이 필요하겠다. 이런 이제 생각에서 일단 아이디어 차원에서 창조적으로 피스버스 시대의 개념을 한번 생각을 해본 거고요. 구체적으로는 미국이나 뭐 중국이나 이런 패권 질서에서 좀 더 평화롭게 벗어나서 진정한 새로운 평화의 개념을 바탕으로 새로운 평화 노력을 창의적으로 좀 해볼 필요가 있다. 그래서 이제 아이디어 차원에서 이제 제가 말씀드린 것은 평화의 개념과 평화 지대를 우리가 구축하기 위해서 전 세계적인 피스 네트워크, 평화 네트워크를 형성하는 노력이 좀 필요하지 않겠는가. 구체적인 방법이나 이런 것은 우리가 지혜를 좀 더 모아야 되겠죠.
Yeah, Greenford has another question, but let me finish the response from the Suinong. Suinong, would you come in? Suinong, Dr. Suinong, can you respond for the question? Did you hear the question raised by the purpose? Yeah, okay.
And a very, very important question. I thank for that. But she used long term. This is not launched and in Biden's Northeast Asia trip. And what launched is not defined by Biden and Pentagon as economic new partnership. The correct term is economic security alliance. And it's very much, the prominent. And when Biden visited the Sing-Song and chip plant, what he said? in words. I quote, when Biden visited Samsung Electronic Corporation chip plant in beginning of his trip, he declared, quote, a critical component is working with close partners like the Republic of Korea to secure more of what we need from our allies and partners. And that, quote, to secure our critical supply chains so that our economy, our economic and our national security are not dependent on countries that do not share our values. And immediately, his Arctic counterpart, President Yoon, echoed, quote, South Korean-US ties could develop into an economic security alliance based on high technology and cooperation on supply chains. So key word is already there. The key word is economic security alliance. And economy is increasingly a servant of strategy. And having said that, and also shared 22, some more remote and immediate backgrounds. And this is not only a very unfortunate high tension and between China and ROK and for the problem of deployment SAD and which China in fact and sanctioned South Korea comprehensively for at least 7 or 8 months. And the background is not only that I just answer another question I mentioned that China's change of its North Korean policy to at first to de-escalate the priority of denuclearization, then drop at large denuclearization. The fact is not only, and during President the Moon Jae-in's administration and South Korea partially participating in Quad, and so and so. And the immediate background is that, and President Yoon, and I see my record, President Yoon participating in condemnation publicly with other members, with members of the Code against China's behavior in South China Sea as well as East China Sea. And immediate background is also, and for the first time, and ROK head of state, and along with that, those of Japan and Australia, New Zealand, and participate and NATO summit in Spain. And in the background of NATO's great confrontation with China, and even more, and war, indirect war with Russia. And immediate background is also, and what I have just mentioned, and the alignment, especially of high-tech supply chains, and mainly targeting on China. And so in this kind of background, and also in consideration of and weaker economic link between our two countries, and in the background of not only pandemic, not only zero tolerance COVID policy of China, not only and the economic go downs of both countries. All of these, and I think that the prospect for relationship between China and ROK and will be bleaker even than ever before, and since established diplomatic relations between two countries, at least since the end of China's comprehensive sanction against South Korea, and shortly before the 19th Chinese Communist Party's Congress, National Congress. And I think, of course, and China already have a lot of, antagonists and or less antagonist and countries in its foreign relations. China hate to see a relation with Seoul and become deteriorated or even further deteriorated. And I think that Pyongyang is also, they want to all those things the United States want him to do, and in terms of alliance, in terms of an economic and the security alliance, in terms of other sides, but at the same time, they don't want to make a relationship with Beijing and so bad. But because positive elements are become much less, and leaders' hope is something sometimes cannot be relied on because they have conflicting and conflictive and responsibilities and priorities or policy. And so I think that the relationship between Beijing and Seoul, and in the at least the future, is something we shall not pay too much hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer and response. Is that good enough for your questions? Okay, thank you. It's, we have another questions and discussion from Green Ford. Yes. To whom you are going?
Glenn Ford from Track to Asia. It's a comment rather than a question. I associate myself broadly with Ambassador Detrani's criticism of the irritants that have to be dealt with respect to China, apart from one, which would be the, if you want, the UN tribunal of the South China Sea. I mean, the Philippines won the case on the basis of the law of the sea. I think it's perfectly respectable for me to raise that issue, but I'm not sure the US can, as they refuse to sign the treaty themselves. So it's don't do as I do, it's do as I say. If Biden's serious, when's he going to join the law, ratify the law of the sea treaty?
Any further discussion, or do you have any comment with Green Force? Yeah.
Say one thing on that, Glenn? Sure. I know it doesn't sound.
Okay, it's coming.
Yeah, it doesn't sound. Thank you for the comment. No, you're right on. The U.S. has not signed the law of the sea, but we are in compliance with the law of the sea. I think anyone who's looking at that sees the United States is in compliance with all elements of the law of the sea, and so that's there. But the fact of the matter is, as you said initially, a tribunal did make a ruling based on the law of the sea, and the ruling was in favor of the Philippines. So I will defer to my colleague, Professor Shur.
Okay. Now, if you, yeah, okay. 아니요, 먼저 말씀하시죠. 예, 의원님 뭐 질문 누구한테 하실 건지 아니면 그냥 코멘트 하실 건지 말씀하시죠.
예. 잘 보이시나요?
예. 다행히
일어나서 해도 되겠습니까? 네,
예,
그냥
예.
앉아서 할까요?
예, 편하게
예.
하십시오. 서서 하십시오.
네네. 그 저는 대한민국 광주 서구를 지역구로 둔 국회의원 양양자입니다. 오늘 수인홍 교수님 말씀 또 여러분의 말씀들 잘 들었습니다. 저는 코멘트를
예.
하고
그
싶습니다.
저 트랜스레이션 해야 되니까 마이크 벗고 저 마스크 벗고 하시면
예.
좋습니다.
아까 그 뒤에 문경희 교수님 말씀하신 부분에 대해서 잠깐 제가 이렇게 드리고 싶은 말씀이 있고 연관해서 아까 수인홍 교수님께서
예.
코멘트를 하셨는데
예.
사실 수인홍 교수님이 말씀하신 삼성전자 평택공장 그 출신입니다, 제가. 그래서 아까 문경희 교수님이 말씀하신 경제 동맹이라는 것에 대해서 코멘트를 좀 해드려야 되겠다라고 생각을 한
예.
것이
예.
사실 미중 패권 전쟁 또 미국, 중국, 러시아, 일본, 한국까지 다 해서 사실상 평화가 유지될 수 있는 것은 각 국가가 가지고 있는 기술의 우위가 얼마나 되느냐라고 생각을 합니다. 제가 보도에서 보셨겠지만 그저께 윤석열 정부에서 추진하고 있는 반도체 산업 관련 국민의힘의 반도체 산업 경쟁력 강화 특별위원회 위원장을 맡았습니다.
예,
네,
축하합니다.
그 이유가 아시겠지만 전 세계적으로 반도체 패권 전쟁이 굉장히 뜨겁게 지금 일어나고 있는데요. 그래도 대한민국과 그 상황을 보시면 대한민국과 미국의 동맹이 그 반도체에서 나옵니다. 그렇기 때문에 트럼프 대통령도 그랬고 조 바이든 대통령도 반도체의 중요성에 대해서 지속적으로 이야기를 하고 있고 지금 현 상황을 보면 미국은 대한민국을 함부로 할 수 없다라는 메시지라고 보시면 됩니다. 왜냐하면 아시다시피 메모리 반도체 분야에서 대한민국이 올해로 30년간 글로벌 무대에서 1등을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 대한민국은 앞으로도 메모리 반도체뿐만 아니라 양날개를 달 수 있는 시스템 반도체 영역, 또 파운드리 영역에서 대만을 능가하는 기술을 보유하겠다라는 그런 목표로 지금 달려가고 있는데 사실 대만도 국가로서 외교와 안보에서 우위를 점할 수 있는 것도 파운드리 반도체가 확실한 전 세계 1위이기 때문에 가능한 것입니다. 그 점에 있어서 중국도 앞으로 반도체 패권을 갖기 위해서 정말 그 투자와 예산을 확실하게 쓰고 있으면서 인재 개발에도 총력을 기울이고 있는 것을 보실 수 있을 겁니다. 마찬가지로 일본도 대만의 TSMC 공장을 소니가 구마모토에 짓겠다. 이런 얘기들이 모두가 다 반도체 전쟁입니다. 왜냐하면 코로나에서도 볼 수 있으셨듯이 앞으로 반도체의 수요는 익스포넨셜리 증가한다. 앞으로도 어마어마하게 필요로 한다. 아시겠지만 반도체 컴포넌트 몇 개 없어가지고 전 세계 자동차 공장이 스탑될 정도입니다. 그래서 윤석열 대통령도 취임하자마자 바로 반도체 공부해라. 그리고 대한민국은 반도체가 외교이고 국방이고 안보다라고 말씀하신 게 그 이유입니다. 그래서 결론적으로 말씀드리면 경제 외교라고 하는 것은 글로벌 밸류 체인에서 그 밸류를 누가 얼마나 우위에 가지고 있느냐에 따라서 세계의 이 질서가 재편된다 이렇게 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 그래서 이제 이 학회에서도 이 포럼에서도 앞으로 아마 다루게 되는 주제 중에 상당 부분이 기술을 다뤄야 되지 않을까 이렇게 생각을 하고 내일 저희 이제 발표에서도 잠시 말씀을 드리겠습니다만 앞으로는 첫째도 둘째도 10번째도 100번째도 반도체가 될 것입니다. 예, 이상입니다.
예, 감사합니다. The 양영자 is a member of the Korean National Assembly, and she is appointed as the semiconductor-related committee of new government. So that is her comment about that. Okay, is there any other? Yes, there's some other questions. Please, your name and affiliations and
Excuse me.
to whom your questions going.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Jin Huang. I work as an analyst for the Korean Consulate General here in Honolulu. 주 호놀룰루 총영사관 황원준 전무관입니다. 영어로 질문하겠습니다.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a simple question, or perhaps a couple of questions, and related ones to Director Rob York of the Pacific Forum. So I basically agree with his assessment that the IPEF, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, is a step in the right direction in the sense that it is trying to increase the level of economic engagement of the United States with the rest of the Indo-Pacific region countries. The thing that happens to be at the top of my mind, however, is the worrying prospect, the worrying possibility that President Biden's initiative for increasing such economic engagement may lose steam soon in the near future, especially after the upcoming midterm election in November. So, to describe the current economic situation as a disaster for the Democrats is probably going to be an understatement of the century. The stock market is in the bearish prospect. The rate of inflation is higher than ever before, and highest in the 40 years, despite the Federal Reserve System's attempt to curb it. So my first question is, Director York, what are your personal assessments of the prospect of IPEF surviving and just continuing on its track after perhaps a disastrous result for the Democrats and President Biden in the upcoming election in November? And second of all, if something happens, so as the old saying goes, we may hope for the best, but we also have to be prepared for the worst. So if assuming the worst eventuality, what are some of the things that we can do to make sure the damages of perhaps Republican opponents just stopping all these initiatives dead on its track? So what are some of the things that we can do to prevent the worst from happening, and then just continuing to apply pressure so that the U.S. continues to exert its leadership and opening up to the other countries in the Indo-Pacific at such a critical time and such a critical juncture of history? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rob, it's your turn for discussions. We have to go for the lunch. It's almost 12:30, so please make short for your response for the questions. Yes.
Yes, I've waited a long time for someone to answer a
Oh,
question.
yes.
So yes, I'll try to keep it short. But yes, I understand and I appreciate the question, and I understand the concern expressed therein. The negotiations over IPEF will likely continue regardless of the outcomes of the midterm elections this fall, because it is an initiative that will be led by the executive branch. They do not necessarily need the legislative branch's input in terms of carrying out the negotiations that will take place. And one reason they may be avoiding the bilateral or multilateral FTA format is because they are trying to keep it at level, at the executive branch level, so that they can maintain that progress regardless of how the midterm elections play out. But the concerns that I have, and that I think the questioner would appreciate, would be that if it remains an executive branch action alone, it can easily be eliminated or undone by the next president if that president is of a very different mind regarding such an initiative. That's what we saw regarding the last administration's withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the current administration's re-entry into it. That's what we saw with the Paris Climate Agreement. That's what we've seen with TPP negotiations as well. As long as it remains an executive branch priority alone, it's very easy for it to be undone by an executive branch in the future. So my belief is that IPEF negotiations and progress, whatever form that it ultimately takes, it's rather unclear at the moment, whatever form that ultimately takes will likely continue into the second half of the Biden administration's first term. And if there is a change in administration in 2024, 2025, one can imagine, unless it is an administration that really sees no role for the United States in East Asia, that in some ways those negotiations will continue, though perhaps with a different name. I think that often happens when there are changes in administration. For instance, we used to have the North American Free Trade Agreement amongst the US, Canada, and Mexico, and now it has a different name. It still exists. It's still the same trade agreement with some small details changed, but it continues under a different name because that's what the previous administration wanted. In South Korea, okay, there was a new Southern policy under the Moon administration, and all reports that I've heard says that the Yoon administration is going to continue outreach to Southeast Asia, but they just might call it something different. I think regardless of what the next administration is in 2025, whether it is the present one's second term or a new one's first term, the need to engage Asia economics is going to persist. I'm not sure what we can do about that besides continue to tout the benefits, whether it's for us economically or security-wise. The benefits, however, are real and they are essential.
Thank you. Okay, it's almost time to finish for the first session. So we have to specially thanks to the presenters for attending through the Zoom. It might be hard time for you to stay for a long time. So let's say thanks to Dr. Suinong and Rob York first. Let's give some thanks. Okay, and other presenter like President Jung Sang-mo and other participants, it's a discussion and a comment. Very appreciate your patience and participations. Thank you.